From frontrunner to out of the race, what's the next shoe to drop in the campaign to be mayor? Plus, truth-checking the latest round of election ads. And how do you lose 1,200 sex offenders, most of them from here?
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Nick Haynes, your convivial tour guide through the extraordinary news happenings of the week in this place we call home, pouring through the week's most impactful stories. From 41 Action News, reporters Kat Reed and Stephen Dial. From KMBC 9 News, Michael Mahoney. And from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. The man some believe was the front-runner to be Kansas City's next mayor has pulled out of the race. Former Missouri Secretary of State Jason Kander says he's now seeking treatment at the Kansas City VA hospital for PTSD and depression. In a social media post, Kander claimed he'd been battling the disease for years and realized that it was only getting worse. His abrupt departure throws wide open the race to succeed Sly James as mayor. The story went national with swift and sympathetic claims that Kander was being brave and courageous. Vice President Joe Biden tweeted how Kander was saving lives by sharing his story. But don't we owe it to the public to ask, is there more to this story than Kander's statement, Kat Reed?
Well, I think a lot of people are wondering that because he was, a lot of people considered the front runner. He had raised a lot of money, but his team is standing behind him and says that, you know, this has been really difficult for them as well, that this is about him trying to take care of himself. It does throw this race completely wide open, though, and opens the question, of course, will Councilwoman Jolie Justice come back in? She stepped out once he entered.
There was nothing more to this story, Michael?
Don't know, to be honest about it. Clearly, the folks around Jason Kander were very, very shaken, and genuinely so. My take on it. So if this is what it is, I wish Mr. Kander the very best and all the success. It does, however, remind me a little bit of the abrupt and surprising resignation of Mike Sanders, his county executive, a few years ago, to be with his family, and then it turns out it might be something else. We have no indication that's the case here. But as Kat said, people are wondering, you know, if this is what it is on its face. Everybody wishes him the best, but people are talking.
But he certainly made it clear in his campaign, in his Facebook post, that he had just come off what is going to be the most successful fundraising quarter for any candidate who's ever run for mayor in Kansas City. Is that true, Dave Helling?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't reviewed all the quarters for all the candidates, you know, back for 50 years, so I wouldn't want to vouch for it. I think it was like $500,000. That's an enormous amount of money for a mayoral race, which typically hit around $1 million for the front-running candidate. So he had all the money he needed or would be able to raise it. Money was not an issue in this decision, but as Kat and Mike have talked about, I think we're all trying to make sure, just do due diligence, that there isn't something more to the story. To date, there's no indication of anything other than his concern about his mental health. And at this point, anyway, we should take him at his word.
One thing I do want to point out, a lot of people have asked, you know, is this the end of his political career? Will he be negatively impacted? I don't think that's the case, especially there is a stigma with mental health, but I think that him being a veteran, having that military background and suffering from PTSD makes the stigma maybe less impactful. I think that will enable him to come back.
Michael.
One of the things that this is going to bring up is it's going to, as Kat is mentioning, talking about veterans issues. And the VA over the last 15 years has devoted an enormous amount of money, something over $20 billion to improve education and medical access and job training for the veterans coming out. This is the VA doing it. The military itself, however, does very little to prepare its folks for when they're moving out. There is a transition assistance program, but it's at the 11th hour of a military enlistment. This has been a problem the military doesn't really deal with.
What do we learn about PTSD because of this decision this week. We do know that Jason Kander, 11 years ago, was in Afghanistan. He was there for 4 months, and he acknowledges in his own book that he wasn't in the line of fire. He didn't have to shoot at anybody, so he wasn't in a major combat role. So you don't have to be in a face-to-face combat role to suffer from PTSD?
You don't. I'm the son of a veteran. I was born on Fort Jackson. Working in Jacksonville, Florida, we did a lot with Canines for Warriors. It's a matter of, and what I've been asking people is, what is that thing that possibly triggered him? That's what veterans deal with every day. Is, you know, they fight these inner demons in their mind, but it's what triggered Jason Kander. He said he's been running for 11 years. So I'm interested to see what's that thing that sparked this recent having to drop out.
And the other thing, Steve, you're right on the button on this. The other thing to remember is there are so few veterans in America now. Even with the post 9/11 veterans group, there's about 5 million of them. But there aren't many veterans in society like there used to be with the World War II and the Korean War and Vietnam guys like that. The process of how you live a lifestyle in the military and how you live in a civilian world is very, very different. It can pop up in lots of different ways.
What happens now in the mayor's race, Dave Helling? Who is the greatest winner from this decision, and who is the greatest loser?
Well, I think there is speculation that Councilwoman Jolie Justice will get back into the race. That's the conventional wisdom. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. We should point out, Nick, and this is important, Jason Kander made this decision far in advance of the mayor's race. It would have been much more disruptive had he waited until next February or March before the April primary. So his decision now and his announcement now gives everyone in the field plenty of time to recalculate, to appeal to his voters, to try and raise money from the people who gave him money. So it's much less disruptive than it would have been otherwise. So I think the field is what the field is. You have people who haven't served on the council, people who have. There'll be some reconfiguring, and then we'll see sort of who the favorites are as we head into next year.
The field is wide open, like you mentioned. It's a lot of candidates, but I think a lot of pressure is on Jolie Justice, especially because the Kander camp said they want her to jump back in and they want to support her. So a lot of pressure's on her, but I think the winner from this, possibly in my opinion, is Quentin Lucas and Jolie Justice.
There is polling that is being done right now assessing Jolie Justice's chances of getting into this race, and it makes the assumption that she will get back into the race, and that might happen within a matter of days. I agree with you, Steve. I think the two big winners on this are Justice as she gets back into the race and Quentin Lucas, because he was going to be a formidable candidate anyway.
I also, just another thing to point out is what happens to that $500,000 that was raised. We did talk to the Kander campaign, just so people know. They are contacting contributors to return the money, or anything that's unclaimed will go to Kander's nonprofit, Let America Vote.
Yeah, but we should, just very quickly, Nick, we should not, however, anoint Jolie Justice the front runner if she gets back in. As a matter of fact, when Jason Kander got in, everyone anointed him, and the other candidate said, no, you know, we're going to run our race. That will be true if she gets back in or if she stays out. This field, this race is far from settled and won't really be until next year.
When you include maverick transit activist Clay Chastain, who has vowed to wage a campaign for mayor, there are 9 candidates who still see themselves taking over the office of Sly James. We asked our viewers this week, what's the single most important quality you're looking for in the next mayor of Kansas City, Missouri? Before we get to those answers, what do you see, panelists, as the number1 quality voters are looking for? Michael?
Leadership, hands down. The way the Kansas City, Missouri governor, Missouri City Hall is set up. It is a weak mayor form of government, but within that system, there's a lot of room for a strong mayor, a strong character and individual to emerge. It happened with Emmanuel Cleaver, certainly happened with Sly James. Leadership is the key ingredient.
Stephen?
Leadership is the big word, but more, I guess, specific is someone that can bring people together. We're at a time where, you know, you still have that truth divide. You're still talking about black votes and white votes and other minorities. So someone that can bring everyone to the room together and be able to move forward.
I would say transparency. Someone committed to open government, openness, and to involving the public in decisions. You know, the next mayor will be defined by the airport, basically, or that project, or a large part of the next mayor. That has to be an open, transparent process for the voters to have faith in City Hall. That'll be the big challenge for the next mayor.
I would say visionary, and not in the idea of big projects necessarily, but tackling the issues like affordable housing. And I think a lot of people see Kansas City as one of those cities on the cusp of becoming the next Denver, the next Nashville. So is this the person to take us into that population boom?
Here's what our viewers had to say on the KCPT Facebook page. Jack says he wants someone who doesn't want to use this office as a stepping stone to higher office, someone like Dick Berkeley. Dustin wants someone who will help bridge the city together and continue the forward momentum we're experiencing in tourism and livability. On the KCPT Twitter page, Ed responds, I am for someone who will spend and allocate money fairly across all districts in the city. Craig says, seriously, the next mayor can't engage in any big projects since all of the money has been spent. So I'm looking for someone who understands repairing and rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure is unglamorous but necessary work. And for Richard, the number one quality, someone who is not in the back pocket of every developer in town. We answered a lot of those in our opening round.
Right, we're all saying the same thing basically, which is the mayor, the next mayor, because the job of mayor has changed, needs to be someone who is aggressively involved in his city, or his or her city, understands the issues that are facing the community, and then tries to allocate resources fairly across a very big community. And that's a tall order, but you know, this field is qualified. It's a great field, Nick. Someone will emerge.
President Trump will be in Kansas this weekend. He is making his first stop in the state since his election. President Trump is holding a rally at the Expo Center in Topeka for Republican candidates Chris Kobach, who is running for governor, and Steve Watkins, who is running to succeed Lynn Jenkins in the Kansas 2nd Congressional District. Will Kevin Yoder make the hour-long trip to Topeka to join them on stage? Stephen?
Well, I contacted the Yoder camp to ask, A, is he flying over with the president or will he greet him on the tarmac? I didn't get a response yet. It's been an interesting back and forth for Yoder of trying to be with the president and being separate from the president. I know that Jeff Collier will be at the tarmac. I don't know if Yoder will be.
Actually, Mr. Mahoney and I were there together to ask Congressman Yoder this question at the will they, won't they political debate with Sharice Davids. And Yoder said that he will not be there. He said he has a previously scheduled event in Overland Park. And so he said, nope, I won't be there.
The $64,000 question there is, if he didn't have that event, would he have done it? And I suspect probably not. In the fight that he is in, under the terms of the battlefield that he's on, I think he would have found somewhere else to be besides Topeka.
But for all the indignation that some people have about President Trump, why is it, though, he is rarely featured in any of the campaign ads around our metro? Have you seen who is being portrayed as the villain in most of the commercials on your TV screens right now?
Kobach would be just another Sam Brownback.
Sharice Davids is a Pelosi liberal.
A vote for Paul Davis is a vote for Nancy Pelosi. That's too risky.
Liberal, elite, out of touch. Hillary Clinton and Claire McCaskill disdain Missouri doesn't need.
So why are you more likely to see Sam Brownback, Nancy Pelosi, even Hillary Clinton playing the villain role than Donald Trump this election, Dave?
No, but don't let Chuck Schumer off the hook either. He's showing up
Yes,
in all of these
absolutely.
ads as well. Well, because both parties have targets of derision. And Nancy Pelosi is famous, going back even to the Kay Barnes race against Sam Graves. The epithet of Pelosi liberal has been a time-honored go-to move by Republicans, so that's why you see that here. Donald Trump is a wild card in terms of his impact on the electorate's decisions. And so I think both parties, Nick, interestingly, have decided to sort of stay away from, using him in commercials. And the public knows about Donald Trump one way or the other. And if you're making a decision for a House seat or a Senate seat based on Donald Trump, you kind of know where everyone
But they know
ends
where
up.
Nancy Pelosi is, don't they? They know where Sam Brownback was.
You see, I disagree with you here on this. I think that Trump is sort of the elephant in the room. Certainly in the case of the Senate race, where Josh Hawley has tied himself very closely to the president, who's been in repeatedly and will probably be back for him as well. At one point, there was a Trump-Hawley ad that was on the air, and that wouldn't be on the air in Missouri if if it was problematic. I think that Trump is definitely a factor in the Missouri Senate race and the Kansas governor's race.
Just to defend myself from Brother Mahoney for a minute, Donald Trump is on the ballot. In fact, if Kevin Yoder loses, I've written this, it will be because of Donald Trump and his connections with him. It's also in Missouri. What I'm saying is it's not part of the advertising, because I think a lot of people understand it's
Okay, well, someone else you're not seeing in those ads as the #1 villain is Barack Obama. Have you noticed grainy photos of Obama aren't in any of the ads either? The former president, though, this week endorsing Sharice Davids in a tight race against Kansas Congressman Kevin Yoder. How much value is that to her, Stephen?
I don't think it's much, because if people are voting Democrat in the 3rd Congressional District, which is a unique district, they're going to vote Democrat because they're voting Democrat. I don't think Barack Obama is maybe the whipped cream on top. I honestly don't think it carries weight.
Some questions this week about whether the National Republican Party was actually now giving up on Yoder as they pull funding for a large ad buy in the district. The Washington-based political website The Hill reporting that the National Republican Congressional Committee has canceled more than $1 million in planned advertising for the Overland Park Republicans, citing a nameless source who says the party is pessimistic about Yoder's chances. Is this totally anonymous source a fair guide to what's happening? Is money drying up for Yoder from the National Republican Party, Michael?
Yes, it is, because the National Republican Campaign Committee did in fact pull out $1.2 million. Yoder, as Scott was referring to when we were talking to him, acknowledged this is happening, but we're going to be okay, and also at the same time tried to maintain that the chairman of the Republican Campaign Committee, Congressman Steve Stivers, was assuring him everything was okay. There is, when you get a signal like this from a party campaign committee that they're pulling money out in early October, there's no way that can be translated as a positive sign.
Kat.
Yoder referred to himself multiple times as the underdog in this race. And, the anonymous source they're referring to, is it the several polls that have come out that show him trailing by several points? I think that the polls haven't been great lately for Yoder.
And he certainly seems to have plenty of money because he's running a huge number of ads. Anytime you click on a website or in almost every commercial break on television, you see older adults speaking to the camera saying how nervous they are about their Medicare because of Yoder's opponent. Have you seen them? Well, let's do an old-fashioned truth check.
We've worked hard our entire lives paying into a system we were promised would help us.
And today, we depend on those benefits for our health care needs.
And that's why Sharice Davids scares us. She'd end Medicare as we know it and double our taxes.
Why would she do that? That's not fair.
Kevin Yoder has always protected seniors, and we trust him to keep the promise that was made to us.
So what's the truth? Is Davids going to change Medicare as we know it, Michael?
She supports a bill in the House that would provide Medicare for all. And it's a bill that was originally brought up by Congressman Conyers and then Congressman Ellison from Minnesota. The companion bill to that is a Bernie Sanders bill over on the House side. When they talk about ending Medicare as we know it, it's because it would be replaced with Medicare for all. So the other thing is in there that the ad talks about is Yoder protecting seniors. Democrats will say his 19 votes to kill some version of Obamacare over the course of the last few years indicates that's not the case.
They also talk in the ad about doubling taxes under Sharice Davids.
Well, their estimates as to how much so-called single payer or some version of that would cost. One of the arguments that made by Republicans is that it would have cost $30 trillion or $32 trillion over years. They don't count, of course, the premiums you would no longer pay for your health insurance at work. There's a more fundamental dishonesty in that ad, though, Nick, and that is this. In essence, the argument is don't bring socialized medicine to the public. Protect our socialized medicine, which is what Medicare is. And the Republicans all over the country are trying to sort of say, we like socialized medicine if you're over 65. We hate it if you're under 65. That's fundamentally dishonest.
In other news this week, Missouri has lost track of more than 1,200 sex offenders. It's a story making national news, and we're told we're not talking about people charged with minor sex crimes.
Almost 800 of those offenders would be classified as the most dangerous, known as Tier 3 offenders. Offenses in this category include rape, sodomy, or child molestation in the first or second degree.
That's Missouri State Auditor Nicole Galloway sharing details of a new report showing Missouri can't account for about 8% of the 16,000 sex offenders required to register with law enforcement, and many of the missing are from here. In fact, Jackson County has the second highest percentage of sex offenders gone AWOL, 439 according to the audit. That's more than 20% of all the known sex offenders in the county. What's to blame?
Well, I talked to Sheriff Forte, Interim Sheriff Forte, a few months ago when we reported this on 41 Action News, and he's blaming the former sheriff. He says that there was not measures in place to track it, and it's just blown up. It's gotten out of hand, and he says they need more staff. He said they added another staff member to help with this, but he's pointing the finger at the former administration.
But hasn't there been an explosion of laws over the last few years that mean that far more people have to register on these sex offender registries, an additional burden on police that they didn't have to deal with a decade, 2 decades ago, Kat?
It's true. There are tons of these laws. Missouri's not the only state having this issue. This happens elsewhere where it's difficult when you have a lot of other things going on in a county. This sometimes falls to the bottom of the list.
Why, though, Jackson County being one of the worst places in the entire state, Michael?
Well, part of the reason is what Steve just described a second ago. It does not appear that there was an emphasis on it. There's also a demographic issue in the fact that we're a big city. Jackson County is a big area. More of these folks that are going to be required are going to be signing up here. But there is a fundamental breakdown here. There's no question about it.
The other thing that Nicole Galloway said, though, is that there's a lack of enthusiasm among officials across the state to actually chase these offenders because it's time-consuming, difficult, expensive. You need a lot of people to do it, even in the smaller counties where this is an issue. And sometimes there's a lack of jail space and a reluctance to prosecute the people who don't file. So there is a combination of factors involved in this backlog. And there's no promise, by the way, that the backlog will narrow anytime soon.
And the numbers, really quick, the numbers are interesting. When I did my story, St. Louis County, unlike Jackson County houses, the sheriff's office is in control of the city's sex offenders and the counties. In St. Louis, they only handle the county. The city and county are separate. So those numbers are a bit different.
And what about the timing of this? The Missouri State Auditor is running for re-election this November. Why now?
Well, I think you do have to consider that, especially because we did this story that this was an issue a couple months back. But I do think that it's important information for the public to know. One thing that I do want to touch on is there's a lot of public anxiety anytime you bring up the topic of sex offenders. And one thing that is kind of interesting, a lot of critics of these lists will point out the fact that a lot of times these are people, the offenders knew their victims. And so the likelihood of the recidivism in a community is very low. So a lot of people criticize even the usefulness of these at all.
Amazon this week was making big headlines as it announces it'll offer $15 an hour starting pay. That's good, too, for all Whole Foods employees, since Amazon recently purchased the grocery chain. Target also promising to offer $15 an hour by 2020. So with all of these companies voluntarily raising wages, does that take the wind out of the sails of the upcoming statewide ballot question in Missouri that will ask voters to raise the minimum wage to $12 by 2023, Michael?
No, I don't think it does at all. In fact, I think it does exactly the opposite, and that is ratify that there is a march away from where the minimum wage is now, and it's slightly bigger in Missouri than it is on the national average and the national minimum, towards a different number, whether it's $12 an hour, $12.50 an hour, $15 an hour. This, I think, ratifies that the move is the wind is heading in that
But if you
direction.
have companies doing this voluntarily, why do you need to have the state step in and do something?
Well, because the companies are doing it in part, Nick, because unemployment is so low and they need to pay higher wages to get workers. That situation will change in 3 or 4 or 5 years whenever the next recession hits as part of the business cycle. At that point, you want to have a minimum wage increase locked in so that businesses don't go, well, we can only pay you $10 an hour now or $9 an hour. There's no promise that this is permanent. A change in the law would make it permanent, and that's why people want to pursue it.
It's been an amazing few days of news here in our metro, but who do you think was the Kansas City Newsmaker of the Week?
For all our talk about politics, was it this man, Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs quarterback who's become an NFL sensation, and for a brief time this week was the most trending topic on Twitter worldwide? Despite his on-field magic, was he pushed out of the #1 slot by Jason Kander's stunning political announcement? Or by Missouri auditor Nicole Galloway attracting major national attention from CNN to USA Today for blowing the whistle on local law enforcement and their failure to track sex offenders? Or was it this man, George Smith, the MU professor who this week shared the Nobel Prize in Chemistry?
Or did you have another candidate for Newsmaker of the Week in this place we call home, Kat?
I think those were great candidates. I think that it really depends on who you are. I think people who are very plugged in would say that Candor's announcement was the biggest news of the week, but I know a lot of people who are watching the Chiefs, and Mahomes is their Newsmaker of the Week.
Stephen?
I think we have a United 41 News answer. I think Jason Candor, if you're really into it, yeah, he was courageous by coming forward about a mental illness problem that he's been battling with. But we are in football time, and the Chiefs are red hot, so Patrick Mahomes.
And I want to thank both of you for watching Channel 9 and watching the game.
Oh, good. I'm sure your news director will be really happy about that.
Right, and we'll be happy to take subscriptions to the Kansas City Star when the show is over. I think most of Kansas City was riveted by the Brett Kavanaugh, Christine Ford decision in Washington, which is playing out even as we speak.
And what is but the local connection to that?
Well, to see how people will vote and what the reaction is, I think that's locked in now. But I do think that people were discussing all over the community this week what the impact of her story was, who was right, who was wrong, what does it mean, what does it not mean. That will also impact the Yoder race, the Holly McCaskill race, so I think that was the story. But a tip of the cap to Mike Moustakas, who drove in the winning run in the 10th inning for the Milwaukee Brewers, I hate to say it, and they won the first game of their division.
Well, as you talk about that, though, we've spent a lot of time talking over the last few weeks about Claire McCaskill and her vote on the Kavanaugh hearings. However, a confirmation. But we forget about Roy Blunt, and
Correct.
we forget about Jerry Moran and Pat Roberts in Kansas. They're all locked in as yes?
Yes, and that's why there wasn't much news about that.
And that is our week in review. From KMBC 9 News, Chief Political Reporter Michael Mahoney and Dave Helling of your Kansas City Star. And from 41 Action News reporters Kat Reed and Stephen Dial, I'm Nick Haynes from all of us here at KCPT. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.